our session today, we will be having the mode of grouped data. Now, take a look at the formula. This will be the formula of the mode of grouped data. You have there the symbol for the mode, this one over here. The L is simply the lower boundary of the modal class. Take note of that. It's the lower boundary of the modal class. Later on, you will know how to get the modal class. Okay? The D sub 1 here, over here, getting D sub 1, this is simply the difference between the frequency of the modal class and the frequency of the interval before the modal class. So meaning, frequency of the modal class minus the frequency before the modal class. D sub 2 here is simply the difference of the modal class and the frequency of the class after the modal class. I will explain that later as we go on with our examples. I here, you already know this. This is the class size. So take note of the formula. Now let's begin with our first example. So you're given the data here. Find the mode of the following data set. So these are the frequencies and these are the class intervals. Okay, now let's continue. So the first step is simply to add a column for the class boundaries. So we will be adding just one column. Just one column for the class boundaries, and let's fill this in. What should be written in our first class boundary?
6.5 to 11.5.
Very good. That's 6.5 to 11.5. You will be subtracting 0.5 to 7, adding 0.5 to 11. Next, what will be the next class boundary?
11.5 to 16.5.
Okay, that's correct. 11.5 to 16.5. Next class boundary.
16.5 to 21.5.
Okay, 16.5 to 21.5. Next, so on and so forth. So no problem with the finding of the class boundary because you already know that. Now, let's go to step number 2. Step number 2 is now identify the modal class. It's so simple. What is the highest frequency there in the frequency column? 13. So the highest frequency is 13. Therefore, this will be the modal class. The class having the highest frequency is the class or the modal class. So take note in step number 3. I have emphasized now these modal class over here. Now let's determine L. What's our L? What's our lower boundary? 26.5 is your L. Now, how do you get D1? It's so simple. Beginning 13, I will subtract 13 and 10 because 13 minus the frequency before it, maunay D sub 1 na to. So again, D sub 1, that's 13 minus 10. That's equal to 3. Well, D sub 2 is simply the frequency of the modal class minus the frequency of the class after it. So you have 13 minus 9, that will give us 4. And our class interval, it's 5. It's because 42 minus 47 will give you 5. Now, going back to our formula, we will substitute everything. What is L equal to? What is L equal to again? It's simply equal to what?
26.5.
26.5. So, what about D sub 1?
3.
3. So, okay na ni saying D sub 1 and D sub 1. What about D sub 2?
4. Nothing.
4. Okay. What about the I, the class size?
5.
5. Now, substituting that to our formula, it will give us like this. 26 plus 3 over 3 plus 4 divided by, times 5. Now, you add the denominators, you will get 7. So, you'll have 26 plus 5, 26.5 plus 3 over 7 times 5. So, what is 3 times 5 divided by 7? 3 times 5.
2.14, sir.
Again, how much?
2.14.
You will get plus 26.5.
28. 28.64.
Okay, there you go. So this will be our mode. Questions about example number 1? Is our first example clear? Now, I'm going to be presenting to you another example, but this time, I will not be showing the lower boundaries. The class boundaries, sorry. So, in my second example, I will not be showing the column for the class boundaries. Right away, I will determine the highest frequency. What is the highest frequency here?
8.
8. So 8 is the highest frequency. So therefore, this is the modal class over here. Okay, so take note. This is the modal class. Next, let us now determine L.
69.5.
How did you get 69.5?
Subtract ko 0.5, sir.
So 70, correct? 70 minus 0.5, that will be 69.5. What about D sub 1?
2, sir.
How did you get 2? How did you get 2?
8 minus 6.
Okay. 8 and 6, you subtract that. That will give us 2. So, okay na itong D sub 1. What about D sub 2?
6.
6. How did you get 6? You subtracted 8 and 2. So, you'll have 6 there. And the class size is subtracting 55 and 50, you'll get 5 for that. So, substituting everything now to our formula, you will have 69.5 plus 2 over 2 plus 6 times 5. Yes? Yeah. Again? Yes. What's your question? Again ha, pwede ang duha sa babaw, pwede ang kini imong i-minus sa I, you still get 5. You can also subtract this, you still will get 5. You can even subtract this one, you will still get 5. So, any number nga babaw ug ubos sa class interval, lower limit ug lower limit, i-minus, that's your I. Pwede put upper limit, 59 minus 54, that's your I. Okay, bisag asa ang i-minus ana, that is your class size. Okay, now, will that answer your question? Okay na? Okay, let's now continue. So, substituting everything to our formula. So, we have 69.5 plus 2 over 2 plus 6 times 5. So adding the denominator, that will give us 8.
8, sir.
Then what is 2 times 5 divided by 8?
1.25.
1.25. 1.25 plus 69.5.
70.75.
That will be our mode, 70.75. Okay? Any questions about the second example? Everything is clear over the second example? Okay, let's now proceed to our third example, our last example. So we have here, what is the highest frequency?
14.
14. Therefore, this will be our modal class. Okay? Now, from our modal class, let's now determine our L. What is our 25.5? By simply using 26 there, the lower limit, subtract 0.5, you'll get 25.5. That's correct. What about D sub 1?
7.
You'll have 14 minus 7. That will give us 7. What about D sub 2?
6.
6, because that's 14 minus 8. You'll get 6 for that. That's D sub 2. Then the I, 5. So, pwede ka na i-minus, or pwede kini siya i-minus, or kana, or this one. You will get your I there. That's 41 minus 36. That's equal to 5. Substituting everything to our formula, it will be 25.5 plus 7 over 7 plus 6 times 5. So adding your denominator, you will get 13 for this. Now, what is 7 times 5 divided by 13?
2.69.
2.69. 2.69, right?
Yes, sir. Kay 2 man after sa 9.
Plus 25.5.
28.19.
28.19. So this will be our mode for our second or third example.